Let's go ahead and get going. I have another icebreaker question that possibly, maybe, hopefully, is meaty enough that later on it becomes kind of the main course of our discussion. But I do want to start with kind of a simplified version of it and just get everybody's kind of voice to share and discuss this. And the south face is the level of the initiate, and by necessity, it makes it the place where you meet the teacher. And so as in the stages of development, you've gone through the sleeper in the West, where you're unaware of spiritual forces, and move into the seeker in the North, where you're aware of that spiritual connection, but only able to pursue it on your own. You don't have any kind of guide or teacher. And then we come into the South, and that's the initiate, where you are able to connect with a teacher or teaching group and become an initiate of that mystery tradition. So my question is, where and how do you find teachers? And this can, of course, I primarily do kind of mean spiritual teachers, but the spiritual component can be applied to any craft. So I'm just curious to learn how you go about connecting, especially again, for the South face, not just like how do you get your basic information on a topic, but when you really need to go deep with it, how do you connect with the teachers that can help you go deep with something?
I've experienced a couple of profound ways that happens to me. One of them is that for some reason, there's something about them or what they're talking about or how they're delivering the teaching that catches me like this and says, you got to go that way. and I become mesmerized and entranced, and realizing that this is something I've been needing to know, and I just open up to absorb it. So that's I call that's the happy way to meet your teacher. The unpleasant way to meet your teacher is the one that tells you the critical or perhaps critical, meaning is interpreted as by being maybe distasteful or uncomfortable information, because they've spotted something in my shadow side that they're bringing it up to my surface, and so it becomes discomfortable. In the old days, I'd say, no, can't look at that, don't want that, you're a nasty person, project it all back on them and go away. And now in my hopefully wiser older years, I go, okay, that's something I need to look at. And so I have to transfer that happy, I really want to go play in this sandbox, need to learn. I have to transfer that back into that place that's making me uncomfortable and saying, I have to get in here and find out what's going on, because anything that's in that shadow side can direct our behavior or direct our thinking, or it has some control over the life. And I don't want anything having control over it if I don't know what it is. So that's the two ways that I meet a really profound spiritual teacher.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you. Who else wants to share on that?
I'll go ahead and go right after that one, because it's similar to what I was going to say, is that I have very rarely actually sought out spiritual teachers. They've come and just grabbed me in different ways. So yeah, I mean, obviously I have some choice in the matter, but yeah, there's a lot of, in my personal experience, there's been a lot of, you're going to do this, whether you even knew you wanted to or had any idea that it was ever going to happen, you're going to do it. So yeah, that kind of stuff. And then also, the happier ones, definitely things that I enjoy researching and reading about and whatever. So yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Cool. Anybody else?
It's I've come across teachers unexpectedly. I think it's kind of a matter of just being kind of open to the learning process. And I've come across teachers in very odd places. Actually, one of them, the teacher who had a lot of influence on me was I found him at he was a welding teacher actually.
Mhm.
And it's like it wasn't really about a spiritual thing, but through the way that he taught welding and metalworking and stuff, it was a very kind of a spiritual kind of attitude, I guess, or approach or something.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I totally believe that, understand that, have experienced that. My very first teacher, not my very first, well, yeah, one of my first teachers in terms of my tarot teacher, one of my first spiritual teachers, practiced what he called the craft. And the craft was about creating things, making things, and welding would certainly fall under the category of metal craft. And the whole thing was that learning to create things was the process of advancement through the stages of initiation. And that's probably, now that I say that, I'm like, oh, that probably is. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say as answer to this question. I'm like, oh, right, Robert, I totally am with you. That's how I learned too. Anybody else have my thoughts? Will?
Well, as far as teachers, it's like I've had a great number, and my pattern has always been just to go and see them, just to go be with them, and sometimes it didn't work out. Sometimes they were sociopaths. Sometimes they were real teachers. Sometimes they really didn't have anything to say. And sometimes the people that didn't say anything said the most. So it's really been kind of, and it's really been an amazing path because it's dragged me everywhere. I mean, and in the heart of it really has always been tarot, which has really been interesting because I remember somebody gave me a deck of cards. It was a Thoth deck and said, what do you know about these? I said, absolutely. And I didn't. I absolutely knew nothing. And so I went to a bookstore, one of those, it was called the Magic Speller in Newport Beach. And I said, any bookstore named the Magic Speller knows about this stuff here. And she did. She knew about it. And she said, yeah, we've got another one. We've got one of his books. And she handed me, one of his books. And I looked at that. And then if you know anything about Crowley's books, it's like, what? It's like, anyway. So anyway, but that was the start of things. And then from there, following that track, I got led off to, going to India. And it was just, so it's always been one step after the other. And you guys right here are part of that path. You'll be a part of it too, because like your welder friend, your welder instructor, you didn't think he, obviously, you're kind of surprised when all of a sudden a teacher is saying something that's kind of out of their curriculum, but it's just like very important for you. You know what I'm saying? So Joy, say something very important to me.
Oh man, the pressure. Hopefully we'll see what happens. Who else? Greg.
Well, I guess I was thinking about it. I mean, I was seeing a psychoanalyst who was doing dream therapy with me. I think he was a very brilliant man. And anytime I would have a number in a dream, he would reference the tarot. Like if I went to an address or something like that, or if there's a number on a piece of paper, he'd add them up. He'd add up like, if the address was 4126, he'd say that's 13, that's death. And then he'd tell me what that meant. So eventually that led me to go to a similar store as like Will was saying. It was called the Bodhi Tree in Los Angeles. And I went into the tarot section in this like the Paul Foster Case book. Like it literally felt like it kind of jumped into my hand. Then we went to like Hawaii on vacation, and my wife and I were reading that, and we marked that as falling down the rabbit hole when we read that book. You know, so that's been a slow, long journey because I've been busy with other stuff. But you know, I would love to get another teacher, but I kind of find that they stumble across my path, or I never really works out when I go looking for them. When they just appear in my life, then, but it sometimes takes me a while to notice, like, oh, this is someone I got to be paying attention to. I'd love to get another one right about now.
Yeah, me too. Who else? Who hasn't gone? Hal?
My teacher dangles a carrot for me through books and people, and from thought to thought to thought to investigation to another investigation to another investigation, and has led me on that way through my entire life. And so it's more about just sort of being lured by the teacher through all of these different experiences, and finding him, her, it in all of these places. And I am able, if I want to do automatic writing and channel my teacher, but find that it's much more immediate if I don't, because then I'm always doubting my own words that I've written and everything like that. And I've got something really cool to point out, but I'm going to wait until later in the discussion to do it.
Okay. Thanks for the teaser.
Just a little carrot dangling.
Thanks for the carrot. John, have you had enough time to think about it?
Yeah, I have actually. If we're talking, I guess, spiritual teaching, I tend to find some very valuable lessons in just everyday, ordinary people, just collectively. Maybe one person will say something that really sparks a thought in my head, or I'll observe the person behaving in a certain way or whatever. And for better or for worse, maybe I could learn things from people who I'm observing as being like definitely demonstrating the wrong way of doing something. And I take all of that information, I just let it settle in my head, and later, it comes out after just thinking about it or remembering it and having it, kind of fuse together. And then it's a process of just maybe looking at, looking at humanity and at large as the spiritual teacher. And if we consider, that if humanity is collectively the multifaceted aspect of the creator, then we're learning lessons from the creator via these multifaceted avenues of individuals. So that's where I get a lot of my spiritual lessons. And then the rest of it is really up to me to really put all that together, which is, the role of the student. The student has to do the work. You can't just sit back and just take the information in. You have to work with that information and use it in a creative way in order for it to really come home to you.
Yeah, and that's the there's the rub, right? It's like we also have to be willing to learn. It would be so nice to just like show up in class every day and get a certificate at the end and a little diploma or something and be like, yeah, I did it. But it doesn't work that way. I think one of the interesting things about the South Face is the fact that it's a place of the initiate, but this primary card for the south is the sun, which is actually the teacher. And so one of my kind of themes that I'm going to be exploring, my carrot that I'm going to dangle, is finding your place on the south, being able to let that teacher step forward, being able to recognize your own position as initiate. And ultimately, a big part of the south face also is, as it transitions into the east, is being able to get the deepest teachings so that you yourself, that will open you up to be ultimately becoming the teacher. And so those are a lot of the themes that we're going to be looking at today. So yeah, John, do you want to take over, and do you have a video for us?
Yeah, I do. And as usual, these videos have no sound, so I have to improvise some narration over the top of this. So we'll pick up where we left off. And now we're going to examine the south side of the cube, which is focused, as we said, around the sun card, the path of Resh. This is where Pulse has characterized as, stepping into the inner circle of deep spiritual learning. And so we'll go from there. And our next step in that initial process is going to down to the south below space, the letter Qoph, a moon card, which is going through the initial grades, doing the work, progressing in the orders step by step, where we go to the next phase, where we revisit the southwest corner, noon and death, where we experience the transformation of how Hulse describes it as sidestepping death's snare that we had earlier had seen in when we were looking at the west phase. The next phase, going to the south above, the letter Tzaddi, the star card, where the student experiences the spiritual vision that becomes the touchstone of their teaching, or their learning, I should say. We haven't got to the teaching part yet, but here we do. When we go to this particular part, the southeast, where we learn directly from the teacher, aka the Hierophant. This is all in preparation for the next stage in our initiation, where we move to the east face, which is ruled by the Empress, and which we will cover in the next session next month.
Do you have, does anybody have any questions or comments yet for John?
Okay,
And
so
John, do
I
you have,
explained it all perfectly clearly. Everything makes total sense.
complete enlightenment?
Okay, we don't need to do anything else now.
So yeah, we're done now. John, do you want to kind of, I think our little plan of attack here is for both of us to kind of discuss a little bit of the sun symbolism. Do you want to start?
Okay, well, in Hulse's particular teachings, he does focus on the BOTA model of the card. So let me see, I should probably have that up and ready to go. So I can screen share an image of that so everybody can see that. So, and one thing that really kind of intrigues me about the way that Hulse, or at least, the way that also that Paul Foster Case talks about this card, is we have the two children, male and female, and they have both of their feet both in an outer ring and an inner ring, as you can see. So one of the ways you can look at this card is that if you kind of compare that to the Lover's card, and how you have the man, the adult man, the adult woman, and we have the angel presiding over both of them. And that has been described as a kind of a model of the psyche, where we have the subconscious mind, the conscious mind, and the superconscious mind kind of regulating. And the sun can be a stand-in here for that super consciousness, and then we have the masculine and the female components of the mind. But they're working in tandem together. I mean, kind of separate, but also together. It's been, Hulse describes it as they're engaged in a sacred dance, I believe. And that they are kind of like going back and forth between that inner and outer circle. So we have a combination of not only working with the inner and the outer experience, but also the conscious experience of those two worlds and the subconscious experience of those two worlds. So there's a kind of a blending of like a two-way blending in two different directions in a way. I think also Hulse makes a commentary, which I found a bit intriguing, about the garden wall, which we see in the background, which is kind of meant as a bit of a protection of that environment that they are operating in. And that the bricks that make up the wall are actually the remnants of the tower, the bricks in the tower that was essentially destroyed in the last phase that we were in on the north face. It's like picking up all that rubble of those barriers that we had created around ourselves, insulate and protect ourselves, and now we can do something more positive.
Well, and he also, there's a couple other things that I thought were really interesting in his interpretation. One, he describes the female child as being the high priestess and the initiator, and the male child as being the candidate and the magician. He does use the word traditional. He says in the traditional image, there's a male and female child, but I think it's always important to be very very careful with a vague word like traditional, because it's like, well, which tradition? Because I'll ask Hal for more clarification. I don't think the Tarot de Marseille, I think both children, they have like a loincloth on, but I don't think there's a indication of male and female in the Tarot de Marseille. And then of course, going back historically before that, it was just allegorical character holding a symbol of the sun. Hal, do you have anything to comment on that in terms of different traditions illustration of that card?
I think I have seen some older decks that do have a boy and a girl.
Oh, okay.
But they're like the Italian tarots. And along the lines of, the one JJ Swiss, which isn't as old, and that's a Swiss deck, but
yeah.
There are some old ones, I believe, that do have the boy and the girl.
Okay.
Joy, I'd like to add something to that idea about the girl child being the high priestess and is the initiator. It just clicked something I remembered from a Joseph Campbell video years ago, where he talked about the puberty, puberty as being one of the initiatory processes that all human beings go through, both in body and in psyche. And he said that women's bodies self-initiate them into adulthood through the process of the onset of the menses. Our bodies take us into that next stage, and it's not a matter of choice. It's going to happen. But because male children don't go through that major change, and so the rituals of marriage and the marriage bed and whatever is then the male's official initiation into that next stage of life of becoming a reproductive and responsible, caring adult.
Oh,
so
wow.
It makes sense that what he said about the woman being the high priestess and the initiator from that cultural and biological standpoint.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
yeah.
and the confluence of that concept is really fascinating.
Oh, yeah, I, like you, I teach a Joseph Campbell Tarot Kabbalah Campbell combo. That's that like is freaky. My theory is that he was actually his Hero with a Thousand Faces was actually a series of path workings, Kabbalistic path workings that he did. But anyway, so one other thing I want to, and maybe John has something to say on this as well, or anybody else, of course, can always jump in whenever they want. I'm also intrigued by the bricks, and the thing that John left out, which we'll also probably talk about at some point, is that Holst describes the bricks as books, as the books that we study, and goes one step further and then describes the cemented together library as a bridge. And of course, he's, again, I mentioned last time, Holst is very subtle in the way that he teaches. And a lot of things he doesn't say outright, and he leaves it for you to put together on your own. So you have to do a lot of close reading with him. Or even, I don't know, close reading is not quite the right word. I don't know what it is when you have to read between the lines and figure things out. But of course, obviously he's referencing, when he says bridge, of course, we all know that he's referencing the Hierophant as the Pontifex, which is the bridge maker. And so, so seeing the books as being a bridge that lead to possibly the teacher itself, possibly, I think that's the way almost all of us learn it. Well, I think almost all of us learn. I was going to say nowadays, I'm like, no, for a long time you learn from books, and if the books guide you, you usually have an opportunity then to meet the author of that book and then study with that author, or so on and so forth. I mean, obviously there are other ways, but it's one of the most common, certainly, and one that we've, I think, all used. So those are just a few ideas that I wanted to bring up that Hulse mentioned. Anybody else want to comment on the card itself? Or John, do you have anything else you want to review before we move on?
I can add to what you just said, Joy.
Okay.
As I mentioned before, my teacher has guided me through all the books I've ever read. But I've had to put it together on my own. Now, on the opposite side of the cube, we have the tower, which is the tower getting blown apart. It's getting scattered. And in the Bible, which is the book of all books, scattering is one of the biggest metaphors. And then there is the gathering together, which is this wall of books. And it makes the connections. And in Hermeticism, it's all about correspondences, metaphors, allegories, adaptations, relationships between a thing and a thing. And this is what I was talking about before about something I wanted to mention. All of these cards on this side of the cube have below a thing and a thing, and above one thing that joins them together, or that addresses them or speaks to them. And so the Hierophant himself, the teacher or the bridge that makes the connections between things, is holding this three tiered cross. And when you have a dyad in Hermeticism, when you have a dyad or a pair of opposites, you join them, you find the commonality, and you go up. in an initiation, and you're at the center of another dyad. And so you find the center and the commonality, and you go up, another initiation. And this is the way that the teacher of connections works in Hermeticism. And so studying all of these different things and putting them together after they've been scattered all through the world, through all its spiritual systems, is our process that we come to. And I think on this side of the cube, it's all coming together. And these kids who have one foot out in the exoteric world, which might be equated with exoteric spirituality or religion, and then one foot esoterically on the inside, in the inner circle of the esoteric teachings and spirituality, are holding hands and making a connection.
Nice. There's a lot there to think about. John, do you have anything else that you want to use to sum up on this side? And if not, stop sharing your screen and we'll go on to the.
I'll stop sharing now. I'll just say that one of the reasons I kind of glossed over the whole books thing is because I'm not really sure I entirely agree with Hulse on that particular point. But
Okay.
if I look at them, in a symbolic sense, that these bricks are perhaps pieces of information that we've accumulated through, or that has been accumulated in the pursuit of this kind of knowledge, then yeah, that makes some sense to me. And perhaps maybe to update the imagery a bit, we could look at those as files.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If most of us store information electronically now, and so you could look at that. Okay, there's a file. This is a container that has information in it that we can dive into and pull out at any time we want, or anytime we need to, and that we can make the connections between these files by opening them up, comparing them, fusing ideas together, and having that taking us probably almost transcending the basic knowledge that's in the information, and then have it become experiential.
Okay, good.
That's my take on it.
Good. This is not building off of the things that other people are saying necessarily, but I did want to kind of point it out before we move on. One thing that occurred to me as I was rereading this morning is that there's so much with the idea of light usually being a metaphor or symbol of knowledge, enlightenment, and some things like that. And sometimes people that are stuck too much in a binary then say, well, if light is knowledge and is truth and is enlightenment, then therefore darkness is lack of knowledge and lack of truth and lack of enlightenment, and therefore it's bad, which of course is not true. They both have their purpose, which we know through having gone through that north side on the cube, which the north side allowed us to explore on our own, which is incredibly important for your own development. It's necessary. It's for your development. But keep in mind also that even as we use some of these metaphors to explore the place of light, remember, it's not the ultimate step. It is the next, and we don't even go through the last two, the above and below. Hulse even advises skipping them and going straight to rebirth again, to come back as the Bodhisattva. But when but of the major steps, the 4 major steps of initiation, the final one is the East, which is dawn, and that has to perfectly balance the light and dark, and not dawn on the way to high noon, but dawn as a balance. Because we've already been through high noon, and we've actually come through that back to the East as our level of highest, again, not the final initiation by any sense of the means of any, whatever I'm trying to say, of any sense, but nevertheless, one of the highest, like, attainable initiations. I think some of the others are a little bit beyond corporeal attainment. And so really recognizing that sense of keeping the 2 in balance as being a primary goal for our own. And so as we extend that metaphor, it's just like, well, if the South is the teacher and the North is like fumbling along on our own, keeping those 2 things in balance as being our ultimate goal towards becoming a teacher, and so on and so forth. Anybody else have anything on the sun? Or shall we move on to the moon card and the paths around the edges?
I'd like to just throw out one little thing. I won't go into it in detail, but I know last time I mentioned that the double letters had 2 tarot cards assigned to them in a certain school of thought. The sun's other card is the magician. So just thought.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Cool. Nice. That is a nice, that is teacher and initiate then at the same time. Following the other symbolism that we're working with. Okay, cool. So the next card is the moon. And again, as with all of our faces, we have our double letter planet in the center, and the outer edges are the single letters, or the astrologically the zodiac signs. And so we go from the sun card as the sun down to the moon card as Pisces. And one of the things that I observed, particular, kind of hit me today. I kind of had some inklings prior, but it kind of hit me today. The references that we get to that balancing sense that we find in dawn, and the moon card, of course, is one of them. And if you didn't already know it, just in the past week or 2, Mary K. Greer posted it again, or some more information or something on our website. At least I got a notification from her blog, that idea of that phrase between, it's usually in French or Italian, I think, but it's between the dog and the wolf, is a reference to dusk and dawn, to that twilight time. The other reference is an implied reference via the tree of life to the emperor. And the emperor is the card that connects the Tiferet on the tree of life to Chokmah, and that is, Tiferet is the sun and Chokmah is the zodiac. And so this particular face, the outer edges are always they're always zodiac signs, but in this particular face, we get that sun in the center and zodiac around the edges, which is a Tiferet Chokmah reference. And so, of course, the connecting path then being the emperor. And so the idea of bridging those 2 brings us to that emperor card, which, remember, the emperor, the Hierophant, is the teacher that teaches us, and we receive the teachings that probably grow into what we then teach. But the emperor is on the east face. We kind of got a little hint of him on the north face. The emperor is us as teacher. And so there's a subtle reference in there, I think, to to kind of making that connection with your own inner teacher, your own wisdom, which is a Hokmah word, and starting to be able to express it. In terms of the moon card, Hulse, I mean, talks about the moon card as being the initiate and the sun card as being the teacher. And so as the initiate, we reflect the knowledge of the sun. And he goes through the standard symbolism with the crab or crayfish or whatever, whatever lobster, some people call it a lobster, I don't know, whatever people want to call it. I learned it as a crayfish, coming out of the water onto the path, and that is the initiate, you know, coming out of their self-study and opening up into the awareness of the spiritual traditions. The wolf as being the kind of temperamental, I don't know what the right word is, temperamental student which is, I'm totally this, that's why I'm laughing. That's always like, no, that's not right. No, you got it wrong. And is like obfuscating the teacher's teachings and refusing to accept them. And then the highest stage would then be the dog, who has become obedient to the teacher, which is again not a goal, remember, but just a stage on the process of development. But there is an important stage of going through being that obedient student and actually learning what the teacher has to say, because then maybe you can understand better and proceed on your own in your own studies. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments just about those basic symbols so far?
No, I think probably one of the things I was thinking about in regards to that also, I mean, and I tend to look at this, you know, being the earth sign that I am, is like bringing it down to the ground, as well as, you know, keeping in mind that this is, you know, all, you know, about, you know, much more abstract spiritual ideas. But even like if we consider this from a psychological point of view, that the moon, AKA the letter Qoph, which is, translates as a word is to the back of the head, is that subconscious, or at least, you know, the unconscious part of our experience. If one like is responsible for the autonomic functions of the body, it also, you know, generates the imagery we experience in our dreams. And according to maybe Jung, you could say this is where, you know, we contact the collective unconsciousness. And this is kind of a descent back into the darkness that we were probably working with on the west face, or the north face, I apologize, where we were in that solitary mode, and we were kind of like fumbling our way through things. Except here, I think we have the added benefit of now we've experienced the environment that the sun represents, that inner circle. We have a whole, not just the teacher, but we have fellow students as a means of support and guidance. So when we go back into that subconscious realm in the dark, we have that reflective quality of the sun in the moon as acting as, you know, it's like you're in the dark, but you're not in the dark alone this time. You have signposts to look for. You have a guiding light to help you navigate that territory.
That's awesome. And I love your interpretation of that. One thing that made me think of is that our north below is the Hermit, and that's Virgo. And then south below is Pisces, and Pisces and Virgo are opposite to each other. And so, and I think there's a fair amount of importance to the symbolism there, that Virgo is that kind of one step at a time, detail-oriented process, where, you know, kind of, not to pick on John, but his reference to his detailed outlining that he does is a really good example of the Virgo process of learning. And the Pisces process of learning. Pisces is, to me, I think of it as it's the ocean, and so there's a sense of boundlessness to it, that it cannot be contained. Unlike Virgo, which is the opposite and can analyze and cut up and allocate everything. Pisces is the opposite of that and can't be contained. And so in the Pisces side of learning, it's a complete immersion into a way of being or a culture or and you know, in this case, a tradition, a mystery tradition, and that part of your learning is not simply through reading those books, as John was right to kind of gloss over them in some ways. And it's not through that, but it's through this immersion in this way of thinking, of being, of studying, learning, and so forth. And I would say maybe even extending into the ways that we learn via psychic connection, emotional connection, and just things like that. I think all of those become relevant because we have something to connect to, which we didn't on the north face. We only had ourselves. So until there's more to that, but I'll just leave it at that. So we have other people in particular that we can connect to on this space. Any other thoughts on that?
This, I'm not sure if I'm because I don't have the book. So I was looking at the Cube of Space, and I was looking at, and I believe they're the same cards that John has posted up there, but what I noticed, what I thought was kind of interesting, was that all the cards on this face are all central characters with two minor characters paying attention to them. The sun has the two children. The moon has the wolf and the dog. Even death on this particular card has a man and a woman's head. And the star card, she's dealing with two jugs. So there's a correlation between a major character doing something with the minors, right? And I think that's the teaching thing. The different styles that are taught would be represented by, of course, the cards and what the figures are doing with them, you know. The sun and the moon to me are kind of interesting because they're the most easy to see, because it's the male and female, and then the wolf and the hounds in this particular rendition. So it's very clear, you know. It talks about the differences about what I'm not sure, but there definitely, you know, some kind of difference in terms of how the learning takes place, whether it's the wolf that breaks free and takes his own path, or the dog that remains with the teacher and is educated, or is like I think you said it very well. Is the one does it by not this, not this, not this, you know, nete, by delineating that way, and the other one compares it to yes, this and this and this. You see what I'm saying? So I kind of did that and repeated that theme over and over on this space.
I'd like to share something that just hit me, and this feeds back into my shamanic training. Is that the initiations in shamanic training are really all a part of a process of unification. So the Virgo side, Virgo's analytic, what do? We take things apart and we compare things, And almost the first thing you do when you take something apart is you split something into its opposites, light and dark, good and bad, happy, not happy, whatever. So we're Virgo's analysis is splitting things apart. And the Piscean ocean and the immersion, that's where everything gets all mixed back together in a soup. And it sort of, then I realized I got the picture of the two children in the BOTA card with one foot on the outside, which is the exoteric stuff. And then they've got their other foot. So, and they're actually bridging across from what is attachment to the outside world, which is all the world of dualities and separations. They're moving into that world, that initiation into the unification. And Will just brought up those cards all have two things on it, including the Hierophant, which has the two supplicants. So showing that transitioning through the initiation, through the learning, through the working with the master, of going from two-ness into unity. That's really cool. Thank you, Will.
Cool, David.
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick. I love all of that about the finding the middle. That's the middle path to me on the tree of life. And what I find interesting is the crayfish represents Malkuth, because that's your inverted triangle
Okay.
underneath. And then we have, Pisces. We've got the ocean or the soup or whatever you want to call it of manifestation. And then you got to get pulled up out of that past I forget the Sephiroth right above there. Anyway, the one that's confusing.
Yesod?
Yeah, Yesod. That, from what I understand, Yesod is confusing. So you got to get help to get through that Maya up into, to move forward. Anyway, yeah, all good stuff. Thank you.
Tomberg
awesome.
in Meditations on the Tarot, Tomberg talks about looking up from the sphere of Malkuth towards Tiferet, the sun, but it's eclipsed in the moon card. And that's what's actually going on in the moon card. And the face on the moon is our own face. The illusion that we are God, the ultimate, is the illusion that we have to bypass or dissolve in order to get to the higher reality.
Yeah, I like that.
at
How
Tiferet.
I wanted to ask you really quickly, the moon card, where does that fall in the paths on the tree of life? Because I don't have that memorized very well.
Isn't it on the right?
Oh, okay. It may be. I was just thinking.
Malkuth and Netzach, Joy?
It connects Malkuth with Netzach.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, and that's awesome how that you brought up eclipses, because I was thinking about that very thing this morning, due to the fact that both the sun and moon are on the of course, obviously not the moon, which is the high priestess, but just having the sun and moon together could bring to mind the idea of an eclipse. And I think that's part of where I want to explore, and I'm going to come to it hopefully when I'll have time when I get to the star card. Again, the idea of how the initiate and how the teacher kind of interact, and there is an eclipsing, I think, is part of that experience and part of perhaps the immersion as well.
Tomberg also talks about that the crayfish, being a crayfish, is actually moving backwards and retreating as a reflection of progress, going backwards into the water.
Well, and that's how crayfish move. Somebody was posting it in some tarot group on Facebook a while back. There's posting a bunch of videos of crayfish moving, and that is true. I didn't know they got it from Tomberg though. That's cool. Yeah, that's a fascinating piece of information. I'm loving this, but I do want to make sure we get all our cards. So I want to hand off to John and the death card. Was there somebody else that had a comment before we do that though? Okay, I'm gonna hand it off to
Can I
John.
just say one small thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Looking at it, I'm looking at the Sephira on the tree of life. I'm looking at the spheres, Tiferet and Yesod and Malkuth. And one of the things I noticed was that on the face, it has the sun in the center, and then below it is the moon, which is the way they are on the tree of life in terms
Yeah.
of the sphere, you know.
Yeah.
The moon physically is the only planet that goes, you know, between the sun and the earth, and then on the outside, all the other planets are either designated inner or outer planets. So it's kind of an inner outer thing. And the thing I like
Nice.
about it is it only shows one face.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, so this would probably just lead off the discussion on the death card by just posing a question first. And seeing as the letter Nun is associated via the Sefer Yetzirah with the quality of motion. And if we can regard motion as change, as going from one state to another in the course of space and time. And that's linking that with the idea that the death card is an experience of transformation. What are we transforming in this context? And more importantly, how are we transforming it? And that is a question to the group.
Well, alchemically, we're transforming lead into gold. We're transforming ourselves.
Yeah, this death and rebirth is not a corporeal death and rebirth. It's a spiritual death and rebirth, which is practically the definition of initiation, I think, right?
Hmm.
I think I might be de-initiating. I think I may be going backwards from gold to lead. Much less responsibility.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So I guess, it's like what, building off of what we were talking about with the moon card, having that being the immersion into this, I guess you could probably characterize that as a stage of dissolution, where you are immersing yourself in something greater and allowing yourself to become part of it. And then we come to this stage with death. Then what are we getting out of that dissolution?
I'm definitely equating that with ego death. And what we're getting out of that dissolution is finding the parts that make us up so that we can reassemble them, hopefully, in a more effective manner. That's my take on that.
I was just going to say, from a shamanic point of view, remembering,
Mm-hmm.
putting back together, remembering, and remembering is resurrection, which is depicted in the judgment card, where we see the person coming out of the cube and transcending the cube.
Yeah, that's exactly what the thought I had earlier about that. And then you could probably look at this whole process of looking, of the South Cube as something akin to a shamanic journey, where we are descending into the underworld with the moon card. And now we're in the death stage of it. In Noon, we're experiencing that ritual dismemberment of the self. We're being taken apart. All of our components are going, and then we're looking at ourselves fragmented and able to examine all of these different aspects of ourselves in the context of this greater learning.
Could I ask really quickly, John, had you mentioned before that the lineup of the cards in the cube of space was kind of a spell of sorts? I can't remember how it was exactly, but someone had mentioned that, and I loved the idea that it was not necessarily describing reality as it is, but helping to mold reality to be what was desired. Is that something, had you said that, John, or am I completely confused about who?
I think you're remembering right, and I think I'm remembering right. I think it was in reference to Sefer Yetzirah.
Yeah.
We first started talking about this at the
Yes.
beginning, and that Ari Kaplan, who wrote a very detailed analysis of Sefer Yetzirah, makes an assertion in there that a lot of the translation could be viewed in the imperative rather than as a story. Whereas like most people would say, okay, God did this and God did that, and the universe is created. This is more like, do this, you do this, you do this. This is, you could look at it as, and in part as a grimoire for, personal development and magical development, and also just as a path of enlightenment as we're experiencing here on Hulse's model of the cube.
Okay, thank you. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is that possibly, because this is in the school side of the cube, that this is an opportunity for the initiate to figure out what he or she is bringing to the table in terms of the school itself. Because I'm really into that double letter thing and the shifting. So the rearrangement of things. Anyway, just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, good point. Very good point. I guess, also, since we've brought up the idea of ego death, which, definitely ties in very nicely with the way that this path exists on the tree, where we are extending from Netzach into Tiferet. We're moving away from what is described as our desire nature, and our maybe just kind of moving away from our sense of self in a way. So how do we function without that sense of self? That's a big question here.
I want to say quickly with the moon card, since we're still on it, it gets equated in my mind with crazy, and that is disconnected from the sense of self and, being anchored. So the kind of going off loose in the mind is one of the dangers of not having that sense of self. So it's the rough course of the ego death, in my opinion.
That's a good point. And it kind of also it reminds me a little bit of how John Michael Greer describes this path too, and its correlating path of Ayin, the devil, on the opposite side of the tree. That he describes them both as like gatekeepers, like watchers on the threshold, leading up to that next phase, passing through the veil up to Tiferet. And that both of these, are, the way I kind of describe or envision that is that, the devil is an obstacle to overcome, a barrier, whereas death is more of a chasm you have to leap through in order to get there. And we definitely, this is one of those gatekeepers to make sure that we've got all of our stuff together, and that we've got our resolve all set, and that, okay, it's basically saying, how do you really want this? What are you prepared to do? Are you prepared to leave your old self behind and become a completely new personality based on what you're about to learn and experience? And if you can't handle that, maybe you need to go back and do some more work back, down at, maybe the moon level, perhaps. Explore that a little bit more. Then perhaps you'll be ready.
What was your discussion question again, John?
Well, there are a few actually I posed, but initially it was like, how do we transform? What are we working to transform, and how do we do it? Was the leadoff question.
One of the things I keep thinking about Tomberg, I always do. He talks about the death card as being the calcification of our spirit. The skeleton is the hardest part of our being, and it's the part that has become frozen and carved in stone and unable to change or move. And so, yeah, death would be the dissolution of that, or the transformation of that and the releasing of that.
That brings to me, it actually makes me think of something which kind of answers the question of how we might function without the ego, is that, the skeleton is the thing that's left of us after our corporeal selves have died. It stays intact for a long, long time. That is the thing that brings us our support and our structure. So it's like that bare essence, that's what we're relying on. It's kind of like transitioning to what is eternal rather than what is temporary and ephemerate.
I have a question based on something David just said. I don't know, David seems like he stepped away maybe. Oh, there you are. I think this is very fascinating. This is the first time I ever heard that, the ego death through the moon can lead to madness. And like there is an issue with that. Like, as we approach ego death, the society that we live in, I assume you guys feel the way I do, like starts to feel less real and less urgent, and in some ways actually a negative draw that I feel like, oh, I don't even want to be in this society. But not being able to function in the society can feel like madness. How does one go through ego death without, this is a serious question for me, how does someone go through this experience without going into madness and reaching the sun?
I am the last person to answer that question because I have gone through madness. However, I have heard tell of shamans who have trainers, that sort of thing. There are organizations or whatever that actually see when someone is going through a spiritual emergency or growing or whatever, and they give them the support that they need. That happens, I believe. It just didn't happen with me. So yeah.
David, I would absolutely love to speak to that, and I've experienced that in the past, and I am truly thankful that right now, through my shamanic training, I have a group of people that when I need help, I pick up the phone and I call, and they assist me to work through, because usually it's an old memory, it's an old trauma, it's something even past life that has popped up. And whereas in my youth, when things like that would come up, I would go into almost like paralytic catatonia with not knowing how to face it or not being too afraid to face it. And now when one of those things comes up, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, let's find out what this is, because I don't want it controlling me from my unconscious. So I call my teachers, or I call one of the other people in the group here, and I say, hey, I got something come up. I can't seem to deal with it. Can we get into it? And the support is there. So I'm so happy I have that support, and that I guess, well, that's it. Nothing else.
One thing I kind of want, I'm looking at the Hulse book, and he kind of references this Golden Dawn symbol in relation to the death. And it's kind of reminding me that in some way, death card is like a structure. That there's a structure there that you're seeing through to the sun in the background. I guess supposedly rising over the ocean or sea. And so it's kind of like it's like I guess there's a strip, the skeleton is like a stripped away body. Get rid of the skin, the flesh, and veins and whatnots, and then you kind of just down to the real sort of base of who we are, but there's still a structure there. It's not complete, wiping out of the ego. You need just enough so that you can. I think I saw what I've heard about the true shamans in Siberia and places is that they've let go of so much of their ego that they can't really function in the society, and essentially they're taken care of by the village or the people around them, because to do that level of work they have to they've let go so much of themselves that they it's very difficult for them to function in the world. And so I guess the way the death card to me is kind of like a structure. There's a structure to it.
Just enough ego to carry you through, but not enough to get in the way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And
yeah, I was wondering earlier, and I didn't say anything because it was still kind of a question in my head, but with the idea, John phrased it that through the loss of death, there's a complete loss of the old and a complete newness that is stepping through into the higher level of, and that initiation level of Tiferet via the path of Nun. And I wondered if that was true, if it was a complete, and I was like, well, maybe I'm just like trying to hold on to something and maybe I shouldn't be. But there was a part of me that thought, I wonder if it is more of a stripping away of maintaining the essential. There is a core of who I am that doesn't get lost. Mm-hmm. And everything else does have to be lost in order for me to step into that higher level. But there is a core in that skeleton, especially the way you described it, Robert, but also everybody else that's referenced that, Hal and other people as well. It is really curious to me, like what John's question, what gets lost? It's like perhaps that skeleton is that, whether it's a calcification or whether it's just a core identity that can be maintained. And especially with the moon card in that allows us to explore what that core identity is, if it's a spiritual identity, a soul that is maintained through all levels, or if there is something in the personality that can transition through different layers and levels of initiation. So anyway, it's like I said, it's a question in my mind, so I'll just tell you what the questions are that I'm asking myself.
And that's a pretty good lead into the next stage. We're working with the star.
Yeah, Will,
you had something?
I wanted to just, when we were talking about ego death and what's left behind and everything, I think what I've come across lately is that it's irrelevance. Ego death is irrelevant. You become irrelevant. That's what shamans do. And I'm sure that all of you, or most, I'm sure all of you have been confronted with that when you're told your friends and relatives, well, I'm going to study tarot and do these things. And they kind of said, that's kind of irrelevant. That's like, that's crazy. And that's what I think what the death card is that, and the death of ego is the fear of becoming irrelevant. And you have to transcend that. You have to move past that, that I'll be irrelevant. I'll be that shaman that everybody has to take care of, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what it'll be. I don't know what part of me will be left. But everything changes, and that's the big transition with that card for me.
That's awesome, Will, and that is a perfect segue into what I was going to mention with the star card. So brilliant transition. So that leads us up to the star, which is south above, and its astrological correspondence, of course, is Aquarius. And one of the things that I noticed actually, after we were done last month discussing the North Face, and I was chatting with John, I made this recognition, which I thought was very interesting. On the West Face, the central planet is Jupiter, and the above is which is Temperance, which is Sagittarius. And so Jupiter rules Sagittarius. And so those two are nicely placed on that face. And then on the North Face, the central card is Mars, and the Emperor, which is Aries, is on northeast. And again, the sign that the planet rules is on that face. And even if you go to the east face, the Empress is Venus, and the Hierophant is Taurus, and Venus rules Taurus. And so that's true for each of, again, the four of these major initiations. It's true for three, but on the south face, the sun is at the center, and the sun only rules one sign, which is Leo, and Leo is on the north face. So it's on the opposite side from the sun. And what do we have on the south face with the sun is Aquarius. And an Aquarius and Leo are opposite to each other. And so the sun is in detriment in Aquarius. And I remember when I first started teaching astrology, and I was teaching the dignities and debilities, and, you know, of course, one of my students, because always you'll get a student that is either an Aquarius or a Libra, and be like, well, wait a second, you're saying that my son is debilitated. And so, but the sun in Aquarius is not the sun about self. The sun in Aquarius is the sun about community. The sun in Leo is the fullest expression. I need to express who I am. And sun in Aries, where it's exalted, is kind of the same thing. It's like, I really need to be able to express myself. When the sun is in Libra, it needs to express itself through partnership. When the sun is in Aquarius, it needs to express itself through community. And I think that's one of the main lessons, for me at least, that I'm getting in this South Face is and it's a little bit, it ties in so well to everything that we've been discussing. So it's kind of a reassurance to me that all of the dissolution and the ego death and all of these things are leading up to what I'm considering one of the main points for this space, is that this wonderful arriving at this, like, I'm finally here, I'm in the South, you know, all of my hard work, all the things that I learned in the North have paid off, and I'm ready to be part of the group. There's an immediate possibly ego loss. I'm trying to think how else we experience that, when you have to kind of set yourself aside and not be the wolf and growl at everything everybody says and say, that's not relevant to me, I don't care about that, or whatever. And you have to become the dog and become part of the pack, and kind of go along with the, you know, the alpha or, you know, whoever the teacher is, and be able to experience and learn in that kind of setting. And different people are better suited to that than others. And so I guess I must have made my point. My brain kind of filters out. Mercury's retrograde. So yeah, so I thought that was just like a really interesting I just thought it was really interesting. I guess I thought it was a good corollary to my personal experience, because I had been studying on my own for quite a while. I joined a Golden Dawn group, and immediately all the things that had like been really profound for me and my own personal development, other people were kind of like, oh yeah, we don't really do it that way, that's not really one of our teachings. And there was even apparently behind the scenes complaints about me that I was like, you know, studied things that I wasn't supposed to have studied, or was like drawing conclusions that I wasn't supposed to draw, or some things like that. So that's part of the entire process, and part of the ego death, and the sense and coming to understand the sense of self in the South face. Again, I actually suggested to John that he and I both develop proper discussion questions, and he has followed through and I have not. So I only have myself to blame, but I don't have a proper discussion question. I did want to share that and kind of ask if anybody else has anything to add to that, or any experiences along those lines.
I think it kind of ties into what we're saying before, what you were saying before, Joy, that, or somebody was, I can't remember now. I'm like you, I'm getting so much stuff. But the sun, so the sun doesn't, Aquarius, I mean, the star doesn't represent the sun. So I think that perhaps after ego death, the star, well, the sun is a star. The sun is a star. We have to become the sun. And the star and the sun's duty both is, beyond ego death, is equanimity. They shine equally on everybody all the time. They're always there. They don't go away. It's night because we turn our back on the sun, not because it goes away. And I think at ego death, at a certain point, when the them and us disappear, because that's what ego does. Ego says, me, not me. That's its job. When it goes away, when it becomes permeable, some people like to say semi-permeable, that's things that some don't, then we are able to have that, to that ability to shine equally on everybody. And all that stuff goes away, all that trash that people talk, you know, from one group to the next, you know, well, I'm GD and I'm SGDD and BLT and all that stuff. In terms of, I'm talking about spiritual organizations, AA, all those different ones. All that goes away, and it's all the same. We all just shine our own light and on everybody the same.
It reminds me of Crowley's aphorism, every man and every woman is a star. Meaning that, I mean, he was talking more about, you know, like we all become our own, we could become deities in our own right when we follow that path, and we experience that light within ourselves.
Well, and Crowley is the one that changed the star and the emperor in terms of their Hebrew letter assignments, and gave the star He and the emperor Tzaddi, which it has never worked for me, but it is very curious. And the first references in Monde Primitif to the Hebrew letters and the tarot cards, the first written references, do assign the letters to the cards in a reverse order. So the first letter goes to the last card. Aleph goes to, I want to say Aleph goes to Tav. Aleph goes to the world, and then Beit to judgment. And when you do that, you do arrive at He with Tzaddi, He with the star. So Crowley is, there's a validity to what Crowley did. But yeah, it just the reference to the emperor, which I mentioned earlier, as that path that connects the Tiferet to Chokmah. I haven't studied Crowley well enough. I don't know if he puts the star on, I assume he puts the star card on that path. I don't know if he changes the path or the card. Anyway, somebody that knows him better might be able to address that.
Sometimes.
It depends on the charts you look at.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's some confusion about that.
Yeah, I would agree.
I would never get into a bar fight about that, ever.
Yeah, well, Crowley's not worth getting into a bar fight anyway.
He can get into his own bar fights. Thank you very much. But, I think I'm not to take up too much time with this with Crowley's ideas, but I think one thing that came to mind with me about that transposition is comparing that to the role of the emperor, the way that Case talks about it, is that Case says the emperor is the one who drops suggestions to the subconscious mind in order to kind of get it to do what the conscious mind wants it to process. And I think the star kind of functions in a very similar manner on this face of the cube, where it is the fish hook, it's dangling that lure, trying to pull useful things out of this immersive experience. And of course, death, noon, is the fish that they're trying to catch. So there's that aspect. I think Case refers to it as mental angling or something like that.
Yeah, and that's a really excellent, and that's a reference. He specifically puts it in terms of meditation, and the Piscean state, going back to our moon card, also has a strong connotation of that's part of the dissolution of that Pisces, is a dissolution into it can be into any kind of escapism, but on the spiritual side, on the most productive or positive even end of that spectrum, can be unity with the divine through meditation. So that, again, that's another theme that seems to carry through on this face. John, I think I love these discussions, and I think we could go on for 2 hours about any single card, and certainly our old group did that. But I'm going to hand it off to John now for the Hierophant, as we kind of peek around the corner into the east.
So I think earlier it was brought up that another title for the Hierophant is the Pontifex, which translates to the bridge maker. So the Hierophant here is definitely functioning as a kind of a connecting character. And we could also extend that kind of symbology to the letter Vav, and that the Vav, not only it can translate as a word into nail or hook, which are both fastening devices, things that connect two objects together, but it also, in just ordinary Hebrew language, the word Vav, the letter Vav by itself, is the conjunction and, which connects subjects and phrases in a sentence. So based on what we've kind of already explored in the other facets of the South Cube, maybe we can just talk about what the Hierophant is connecting together.
Well, I'll go first, especially because the last one was really hard for me. I always think of I think there are two connections, and that is the Hierophant connects up to the teaching or the the divine, but he also connects down to the student and kind of bridges those two, bridges student into, or acolyte into the divine, or student into teaching. And of course, that metaphor can be extended quite a bit to explore different ways that that connection is made. But that's my initial response to that.
Any other thoughts?
So I do. Isn't the Hierophant the nail?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bob is as translated as a word is nail. Yeah.
Yeah. So to me, in terms of initiation, he's the binding agent. He represents the binding agent, the part that binds you to your commitment.
Mm.
You know, because when you initiate in any formal initiation, there's generally a commitment that you make, whether it be that you'll meditate or read the cards every day or whatever. And he represents that. And he's the one that kind of assists you with the oath. And it's an initiatory oath. And it's a binding agent, whether it be a marriage or whatever.
Yeah, he's like the officiator that makes it pretty much seals the deal.
Well, you have to seal the deal. You have to take on the thing. He can only offer it.
It's the Godfather. I'll make you a deal you can't refuse. Sorry, Will.
I think actually, man, one way we can look at also the connections that at least Joy was talking about. Also, if we even look at its position on the cube itself and consider, not only is it making that connection for the above and the below, and that's reflected in in the traditional imagery of the card, where you have the gold and silver keys lying at the feet of the Hierophant. Those are the solar and the lunar currents, which again can correspond to the above face of the cube, the magician, and the below face of where the high priestess lies. But also it's a connection between the south and the east, and blending those two types of energies. So we have the learning aspect on the sun and the solar side. And then we have the teaching aspect on the eastern side. So he acts as an intermediary for the student becoming the teacher.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense, because remember, there's the 1 in 10,000 that can get to the east via the north through the emperor. And the fact that the Hierophant is binding the student as the student moves to teacher, the Hierophant is binding that student to a tradition, whereas that doesn't happen via the emperor. And that person, that 1 in 10,000 that gets to the east that way, is not going to be able to truly express their work as grounded in a specific tradition. And so they don't get necessarily the level of support or even buy-in to their teachings, because they aren't going through. I know somebody that I think is one of those 1 in 10,000. So I'm kind of imagining this person as I say some of this. There's not necessarily the level of support or buy-in, but at the same time, I mean, I want to jump to marketing terms. I mean, you're like really positioned when you can go through the Hierophant. You're really positioned as a graduate of a certain tradition, and as an expert within that tradition. You don't get that going from the other direction.
Like like the path of way they take through the emperor is more probably comes with less credentials, perhaps,
Yeah,
than
yeah.
the Hierophant. The Hierophant, at least, has the degrees, and I want to say the artifacts left as a result of their learning, and how the amount of progress that they've made going through the same steps as what we're experiencing on the South.
Yeah.
And that was actually one thing I wanted to bring up too, the idea of the artifact as well. That being as this is, an earth-related card, it's really connecting with the very tangible aspects of this kind of thing. So the Hierophant is working with a very tangible artifact that has been either crafted or brought back from the experience of the previous stages, where it's gone through the phase of the moon, and then death, and then the star, went through this very immersive experience, brought back something of almost a precious value. And then rather than leaving it as an ambiguous or abstract concept, he nails it down, not to use the pun, but nails it into something that other people can look at as a source of inspiration and learning. I think, that goes a ways to explaining too why maybe, Taurans have a reputation for being artists, or, have that connection with that creative activity. So they're
Taurus and Taurus midheaven a lot of times.
Yeah. It's, they go into those deep places and experience it directly. Maybe in a way is there's an artist musician by the name of John Balance who he describes the process as going into those dark, unknown places where people are afraid to experience themselves, and bringing back, an artifact or a souvenir from their experience, so that the others can see it and make that kind of connection via this person's efforts.
I'm really struck by the amount of, like you just mentioned, fear of going to a deep part of ourselves, and that idea of fear of ego death, of all of that stuff still showing up so strongly on the South face. And it seemed like all of those things should primarily have been dealt with on the North face, particularly after the tower explosion and the path of Shin judgment leading us down here to the South face. And yet at the same time, again, initiation means to begin something. To initiate is to start. So that exploration in darkness is really only the beginning of it's only the initiation into the sense of ego loss. And the South face is actually all of us dealing with it and saying, okay, if I'm not that, who am I? And luckily, and maybe that's the answer to, and it's actually the answer Cheryl gave, but now I'm seeing it in the cube itself. The answer to going crazy, if I'm not that, what am I? If you did that alone, if you went through that part of it in isolation on the North face, there could be a sense for even further dissolution. But if you go through that on the South face, then you do have that support team. You do have those people that can connect you and guide you. And that could literally be the difference between, genius and crazy is whether there is that core sense of self and identity that is maintained, and whether there are others to help you out and guide you and identify and say, yep, that's what happened to me when I went through it, and all of that. It's like you need to be again, in terms of like sticking to the mental health aspect of it, it's like you go through your dissolution and you need somebody to fish you out of it. And I think a really strong connection, you know, with a spiritual guide, of course, that's the best way of doing it probably, but having others that have experienced that and know how to fish you out is part of that, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess, you know, it's also like going back to that Case's idea of the mental angling. It's like, you know, who's doing the angling exactly? Is it us, or are we the fish that's taking the bait?
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe even different parts of ourselves.
Mhm.
I mean, in when I'm teaching Reiki, and sometimes, and I guess also when I'm teaching Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, arriving at Tiferet, which is the sun on the tree, there's a sense of connecting with the true self, and and a lot of people misuse, well, that term is used in a variety of ways, and a lot of people are the authentic self, and a lot of people just is like, this is kind of your baseline, you know, I'm a grumpy person, therefore my true self is grumpy. It's like, no. This is the true self. In Buddhist terms, is a self that is connected to the divine, is the part of you that is the perfect expression of the divine, but still there is a sense of identity and individuality within that. And so there can even be the truth self, I don't know, this is like, how do you arrange it, you know, your spiritual teacher fishing your true self out of the dissolution of the everyday self, but it can be your true self, you know, trying to fish itself out. It's interesting to kind of explore that, and how do we get there? That's the question that we entered, and I still have it.
I think, you know, it's probably becomes a different process for everyone involved, because at the same time that we're trying to dealing with the ego death, we're also, you know, trying to learn who we truly are. And once we discover that, I mean, that's going to be a different answer for everyone. So we all have to experience this aspect of initiation very, you know, much, you know, maybe not very much, but on our own terms, at least, you know, in part. So, you know, we all have different bones to work with. So that's what we come back with, is that, you know, that essential self. And then we learn to fuse it with the bigger aspects of our learning, which we went through with the, you know, the process of the star, and being our own sons in a much greater space.
Well, and I like to keep going with that and discuss and see that Hierophant. I really think of Taurus as structure. And it is a nice, because we got Taurus, we got a lot of opposites that we're dealing with that have come up, because Taurus and Scorpio are opposites, and we've got Taurus and Scorpio both on this space, the Hierophant and the Death card, and so there's two different kinds of structure, and I think that's another answer to how do we successfully navigate the south face, and also how do we successfully you know, coagulate ourselves after the dissolution, is through finding that structure, whether it's our own skeletal structure, or whether it's the rules and regulations of the Hierophant. And the teachings of a particular tradition, because you know, all paths lead up the mountain, but you can go nuts if you try to learn all paths at once, because they're contradictory to each other. They all lead there, but they don't lead there the same way. And so finding a system says, okay, not that I don't believe in all these other systems, I do, I think they're all great, but I'm going to dedicate myself to following this system, and I'm going to follow the straight and narrow path, and stay on it, so that I can get to where I'm going without getting lost on all the tangents that I could be taking, which are fascinating, but which have to sometimes be released. And not that the final destination, and the, you know, the phrase, it's the journey, not the destination, is a really important one, but there are times when just journeying can end you up in that state of dissolution. So you've got to be able to find occasionally as well as search. And I think, I don't know, those are just things that all come to mind that kind of cap this off with the Hierophant. And we've gone over again. John, do you want to sum up?
One thing I could probably say, I mean, a couple of ways we could probably look at this entire process is, one parallel could be Carl Jung's idea of the individuation of the self. It follows a very similar process where we do, we do explore our own subconscious. We learn to fuse that with our conscious minds, and then through the process of integrating the two of them, then we arrive at a state where we do recognize our true identity, rather than the paper doll dresses that we put on ourselves so that we can integrate with the rest of society, which tends to corral us into certain modes of behavior and certain ideas about who we are and what people expect of us, rather than what we really are all about. Again, just to recap, that the shamanic journey is another good way to look at this, where you have Resh is communing with nature, Qoph is descending into the underworld, Noon is the ritual dismemberment, Tzaddi's reconstitution and renewal, and Vav is returning as the master of two worlds. And I think one thing probably we were kind of like talking around, although this is kind of like one of the core ideas that we were working off of when we were previously discussing how to approach this, was the idea of what I think it's what Jeffrey Wolf Green calls the ego-concentric approach, which is going around the ego rather than being egocentric, being based strictly on our self-identity.
I like that idea a lot.
And actually to kind of circle back to what you were saying about all the other spaces, at least on the ones that we've covered so far, having where the planet is, the sign that the planet rules is also on the face. I mean, that's also true of the above and the below face as well.
Yeah, it's all of them except this one.
Yeah, the south face is the only one that does not feature the sign that planet rules, which is pretty telling, I think.
Yeah. It just, like, the thing that struck me when I realized that last time is you finally get to the south face where you're in, have all of this knowledge and everything, and it's the one place that you don't rule, that you're not, your place of rule, you have no place of rulership. In fact, you're in detriment. And it really, again, it kind of resonated personally because I do tend to learn a lot from inner teachers and from my own practices. And it was really disappointing when I joined a group and found that some of the things I had learned, some things which were not useful, and the standard way of doing it was better or more instructive or something, but plenty of things that I had learned on my own that were valuable. And still to this day, 10 more plus years later, I still am like, I like the way I figured it out on my own better than what I was taught. So it's hard to kind of navigate that and to, and I have to always remember to reiterate and be clear that I only went through the outer order grades of the Golden Dawn. Our group didn't have the right, whatever to, I don't want to go into it, to do the inner order initiations. So that's as far as I was able to get. And of course there was a lot that therefore I missed from not getting the inner order stuff. But nevertheless, I still learned a lot. Anyway, so yeah, it's a fascinating experience. It's a fascinating experience.
Well, thanks again. This has been great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look forward to the next one.
Awesome. And I think we're going to the east, right, John?
Yeah, so the East will be next. So we'll be talking about Empress and the cards. I think the sequence goes Hierophant again, we're going to be revisiting, and then the Chariot, and then Emperor again, and then the Lovers.
Yeah. See you all next time. Bye.
Bye.